You are not standing in the Egypt of golden artifacts behind museum glass. You are standing in the Egypt of mud and grain, of linen soaked through with sweat, of children sleeping four to a mat on a packed earth floor while outside, the Nile moves slowly in the dark like something alive and patient. You are standing in the Egypt where the average person wakes before sunrise, grinds barley with bare hands, and goes to bed exhausted every single night of their life. And you need to understand that world completely, in its textures and its logic and its rhythms, before you can begin to understand what it meant when that world started to come apart, one plague at a time, in a sequence so precise and so devastating that modern scientists are still debating whether the chain of events that produced it could ever happen again. The Egypt you are entering is not the Egypt of the pharaoh. The pharaoh lives in a reality so separate from ordinary life that most Egyptians will never see his face. The Egypt you are entering is the Egypt of the farmer, the baker, the fisherman, the woman who carries water on her head from the canal to her home twice a day because there is no other way to have water. About 90% of the Egyptian population at this time is rural, living in small villages along the banks of the Nile, and their entire existence is organized around a single, overwhelming truth: the Nile gives, and the Nile takes, and there is nothing you can do about either. The river floods every year, depositing the dark, rich silt that makes the land fertile, and then it recedes, and the planting begins, and then the harvest, and then the waiting, and then the flood again. This cycle is not just agriculture. It is the structure of reality itself. It is the calendar, the religion, the economy, the meaning of existence. The Egyptians call the fertile land the Black Land, Kemet, and the desert on either side the Red Land, Dishret, and the line between them is not just geographic. It is the line between life and death. Your home, if you are an ordinary Egyptian farmer living in the Nile Delta region during the period most historians associate with the events described in the Book of Exodus, is a rectangular structure made of mud brick. The walls are thick, which is actually good engineering for the climate, keeping the interior cool during the day and retaining warmth at night. The floor is packed earth. The roof is flat and made of palm logs covered with a layer of mud, and on summer nights you almost certainly sleep up there, because the interior is too warm and the roof catches whatever breeze moves off the river. Your furniture is minimal: a low table, storage jars, a wooden chest if your family has any prosperity at all. Your bed is a mat woven from reeds. You own perhaps 2 changes of clothing, both made of linen, which is produced locally from flax and is genuinely well suited to the Egyptian climate in a way that almost no other fabric would be. You are not poor by the standards of your world. You are simply ordinary, and ordinary in ancient Egypt means a life of physical labor, community dependence, and a relationship with the natural world so intimate that the boundary between the practical and the sacred barely exists. Food is the center of daily life in a way that modern people struggle to fully appreciate. You eat bread. You eat enormous quantities of bread. Bread is not a side dish or accompaniment in ancient Egypt. Bread is the meal. Archaeological evidence from workers' settlements, including those near the pyramid complexes, shows that a significant portion of daily caloric intake came from bread and beer, both made from emmer wheat and barley. The beer is not a luxury. It is nutrition. The fermentation process makes it more caloric and safer to drink than water drawn from canals that also serve as latrines. You drink it in the morning. Your children drink a weaker version. Your grandmother drinks it with her evening meal. You also eat onions, garlic, leeks, lentils, and when your family can manage it, fish from the Nile, which is dried, salted, and traded throughout the region. Meat from cattle or sheep is rare enough that it is essentially a festival food. Fruits like figs and dates are eaten when in season. The diet is not varied by modern standards, but it is calorie sufficient for most of the year, and it is built entirely on the agricultural system that the Nile makes possible. Now understand what the Nile means beyond food. The river is Hapi, a deity depicted as a heaviest figure with blue or green skin, symbolizing fertility and abundance. When the flood comes at the right height, it is a blessing from the gods. When it comes too low, the crops fail and people die. When it comes too high, villages are destroyed. The entire Egyptian religious system is, at its foundation, a system for managing cosmic uncertainty through ritual. The gods are not distant. They are present in the river, in the sun, in the ibis standing motionless in the shallows at dawn. When you make an offering at the local shrine on your way to the fields, you are not performing a superstition. You are participating in the maintenance of Ma'at, the cosmic order that keeps the universe from collapsing into chaos. This is not metaphor to you. It is physics. It is the operating system of reality. Every Egyptian, from the pharaoh in his palace to the child chasing geese along the riverbank, understands the world through this framework. And that framework is exactly what the 10 plagues are designed to dismantle, one deity at a time, one certainty at a time, until the entire structure of Egyptian reality lies in pieces on the ground. The first plague, the Nile turning to blood, needs to be understood not as a magic trick but as an assault on the most sacred object in Egyptian civilization. This is not just a water source becoming unusable. This is Hapi, the god of the flood, the provider of all life, the foundation of Egyptian identity, becoming something that kills fish and smells of death. Modern scientists have proposed a compelling and well-documented natural mechanism for this event. A massive bloom of toxic red algae, specifically burgundy blood algae, triggered by unusual upstream conditions, could have turned the Nile red, depleted its oxygen, and killed the fish in massive numbers. This is not a fringe theory. It is taken seriously enough that it forms the foundation of a cascade model, because what comes after the algae bloom follows with terrifying logical precision. But to you, standing at the edge of the river watching the water run the color of rust and smelling the rot of thousands of dead fish, the science is irrelevant. What you know is that the god of the river has turned against Egypt. What you know is that you have no water. You have storage jars, and the water in them will last perhaps a week, and after that the options are digging near the riverbanks hoping to reach groundwater through filtration, or dying of thirst. The disruption to daily life is immediate and total. Every task that requires water, which is to say nearly every task in the day, becomes an emergency. You have been waking up and walking to the canal every morning of your life. That walk is routine, it is almost meditative, it is the first quiet moment before the noise of the household begins. Now you walk to the canal and the smell hits you before you see it. Fish decomposing on the surface in the thousands, their white bellies catching the early light. The water is the color of old blood. Your neighbor is already there, standing at the edge with her water jar in her arms, just staring. Neither of you says anything for a long moment because there is nothing to say that would be adequate. You both go home and you both begin rationing what you have, and you both begin the quiet, terrible arithmetic of survival. The second plague follows, and this is where the cascade model becomes genuinely fascinating. The frogs leave the river. They leave because the river has become uninhabitable. Frogs that would normally remain in the water are driven onto land in numbers that stretch the imagination, covering the floors of homes, filling storage areas, dying in ovens and bread dough and sleeping mats. The inconvenience of this, the sheer relentless physical presence of dying amphibians in every corner of your home, is something that cannot be captured by a single sentence. Your bread dough has frogs in it. Your bed has frogs in it. Your children are screaming and your older relatives are trying to maintain dignity and failing. When the frogs die, they die on land in enormous numbers, and the rotting biomass they leave behind becomes the fuel for what comes next. The third and fourth plagues, lice and flies, are directly connected to the rotting organic material left by the mass death of fish and frogs. Insects that feed on decomposing matter would have exploded in population under these exact conditions. Gnats or lice emerging from the dust and soil, then dense swarms of biting flies filling every space. If you have never experienced a genuine insect swarm of this scale, you cannot quite picture what it does to a population. It prevents sleep. It drives animals mad. It makes working in the fields nearly impossible. It contaminates food. It creates a constant, grinding physical misery that wears down the human nervous system in ways that go beyond the merely physical. Your children develop sores from the biting. Your animals are agitated and impossible to manage. And the work of daily survival, the bread grinding, the water carrying, the animal tending, must still happen because stopping it means dying of something other than the plagues. The fifth plague targets livestock. The cattle, the donkeys, the sheep, the goats, the animals that are not just food sources but tools of production, the animals that pull plows and carry loads and produce milk, die in catastrophic numbers. For an agricultural economy built on animal labor, this is not just a tragedy. It is a structural collapse. Consider what losing your oxen means in practical terms. The next planting season cannot happen at the scale it needs to happen. The fields that need to be broken cannot be broken. The grain that needs to be transported cannot be transported. The loss is not just the animals themselves but every future consequence of their absence, and those consequences stretch years forward in time. You stand in a field where 3 of your neighbor's oxen lie dead and you are doing the arithmetic again, the survival arithmetic, and the numbers are not working. The sixth plague, boils, brings the suffering directly onto the human body. Painful skin eruptions spreading across the population, and here the science again offers a mechanism that commands attention, the same mycotoxins produced by the algae bloom that affected the Nile, moving through the food chain through contaminated grain or through direct contact, are capable of producing exactly the kind of skin condition described. You wake up one morning and your skin is on fire. Your neighbor's children have lesions on their faces and arms. The priest at the local temple, the one who has been performing the rituals to appease the gods every day since the river turned, has boils on his hands so severe that he cannot perform the necessary gestures of the ceremony. This detail matters enormously in a civilization where ritual correctness is considered essential to maintaining cosmic order. The plague is attacking not just bodies but the machinery of divine maintenance itself. The seventh plague, hail mixed with fire, is the one that perhaps most strains the modern imagination, and yet the mechanism proposed for it is real and documented elsewhere in history. A volcanic eruption, most likely from the Thera volcano in the Aegean, which did erupt catastrophically during the general period in question, could have produced electrical storm systems of extraordinary violence, with hail and lightning of an intensity that would have appeared supernatural to anyone witnessing it. Whatever the mechanism, the physical consequence is what matters to you standing in the middle of it. The flax crop is destroyed. The barley crop is destroyed. These are the 2 crops that sustain Egyptian civilization most directly. The linen on your back comes from flax. The bread you eat and the beer you drink come from barley. Their destruction is not just an economic loss. It is the loss of the material from which daily life is woven, literally and figuratively. You walk through your field after the storm and the plants lie flat and broken and the smell of wet, crushed vegetation fills everything and you understand in a way that has no words that the world you knew is gone and something else is taking its place. The eighth plague, locusts, arrives to consume whatever the hail left standing. Locust swarms in the ancient Near East were a documented and recurring catastrophe, but a locust event following the destruction of most crops by hail would have been experienced as something beyond natural category. The insects darken the sky. They consume everything green. The sound of them, the dry mechanical sound of millions of mandibles working, is one of those sounds that people who have heard it in smaller contexts describe as deeply wrong, as something the nervous system was not designed to process calmly. After the locusts pass, the landscape is stripped. What remained of the agricultural system after the livestock deaths and the hail is now gone. The food stored in jars and granaries is what stands between the population and starvation, and everyone knows how long that will last and everyone is doing the arithmetic again and the arithmetic is not working. The ninth plague, darkness, is 3 days during which the sun cannot be seen. The same Thera eruption that may have produced the hail storms would have been capable of injecting enough particulate matter into the atmosphere to cause days of genuine darkness at sufficient distance. For Egypt, this is not merely inconvenient. The sun is Ra. The sun is the most fundamental of all divine forces in the Egyptian cosmological system, the one on whose daily journey the entire order of existence depends. 3 days without the sun, in a civilization whose religious architecture is literally designed around solar movement, is an attack on the most basic premise of Egyptian reality. Temples are oriented to catch the sunrise. The pharaoh himself is considered the son of Ra, his legitimacy derived directly from the solar order. When the sun disappears for 3 days, the theological crisis is total. The priests have no ritual adequate for this. The pharaoh has no precedent to draw on. And the ordinary person crouching in their mud brick home in the darkness, listening to their children breathe, is experiencing something that no human framework in their world can explain or contain. Here is what nobody talks about enough when they discuss the 10 plagues, the cumulative psychological weight of living through all of them in sequence. Each one, taken alone, would be a catastrophe from which a society might recover over years. Together, in rapid succession, they create a condition of permanent crisis that dismantles the human capacity for rational response. You have not slept well in weeks. Your skin hurts. Your animals are dead. Your crops are destroyed. Your food stores are diminishing. Your children are frightened and you do not have answers. The religious framework that has always provided meaning and order is failing, visibly, publicly, in ways that the priests cannot explain away. The social cohesion of the community, which depends on shared belief and mutual labor, is fraying because when survival becomes uncertain enough, the cooperative logic that holds communities together begins to break down. This is not weakness or failure of character. This is what happens to human beings under sustained catastrophic stress, and it has been documented in every major disaster in human history. What is happening in Egypt is not 10 separate events. It is one sustained collapse of an entire civilization's operating assumptions. Think about what you do in a day now, compared to what you did 3 months ago. 3 months ago, you woke before sunrise and your day had a structure, a rhythm, a set of tasks that connected you to the community and the land and the seasons. You knew what you were doing and why and what would come next. Now you wake in a damaged body, in a darkened world, in a home that has been infiltrated and contaminated and disrupted, and the tasks that remain are the tasks of bare survival, stripped of their dignity and their meaning. You are not maintaining a civilization. You are trying to stay alive inside the ruins of one. And you are doing this while the Israelite population, living in the region of Goshen in the eastern delta, appears to be untouched by most of what is killing you. That observation, that visible, undeniable contrast, is not just politically destabilizing. It is theologically catastrophic. In a world where the gods determine outcomes, the evidence in front of you says that the God of the Israelites is more powerful than your gods. There is no comfortable way to hold that thought inside the Egyptian cosmological system. What do you think would actually break first in a person living through all 10 plagues in sequence, the body, the belief, or the social bonds that hold a community together? It is a genuine question, not a rhetorical one, and the answer probably differs depending on who you are and what you have. Leave your answer below, because the people thinking about this seriously have genuinely different positions on it. The 10th plague, the death of the firstborn, sits outside the cascade of natural mechanisms that many researchers have used to explain the preceding 9, and it deserves a moment of honest handling. Some scholars have proposed that the same mycotoxin contamination that ran through the food chain could have been most concentrated in the grain stored in the lowest storage levels, the grain most accessible to the firstborn sons who, as primary heirs, may have had privileged access to the best food supplies. The theory is careful and specific and worth taking seriously, even if it remains contested. What matters beyond the mechanism, what matters for understanding what this event meant to the people living through it, is that it represented the final, total destruction of Egyptian certainty. The pharaoh himself loses his heir. In a civilization where royal succession is the axis on which cosmic order turns, the death of the heir is not just personal grief. It is the collapse of the future. It is the end of the story that Egypt has been telling itself since the first pharaoh united the two lands. After this, the Israelites leave. And here is what you need to sit with, because history almost never gives you this angle: what happens to the Egyptians who remain? The infrastructure is destroyed. The agricultural system has been devastated. The animal labor force is gone. The crops for the next cycle are gone. The grain stores are depleted. The social and religious framework that organized collective life has been publicly, catastrophically defeated. The population is physically ill, psychologically shattered, and facing a famine that has already begun. Rebuilding from this is not a matter of months. Archaeologists studying the evidence for significant disruptions in the Nile Delta region during the relevant period find traces of exactly this kind of systemic collapse, the kind that takes generations to fully repair, the kind that leaves marks in the archaeological record as gaps in occupation layers, as changes in material culture, as evidence of depopulation and resettlement. Egypt does recover. Egypt is extraordinary in its resilience and its capacity for continuity. But the Egypt that exists on the other side of this is not the same Egypt that existed before the river turned. You carry this history differently once you understand what daily life looked like before it broke. The plagues are not 10 dramatic events dropped onto an abstract historical backdrop. They are 10 sequential destructions of the specific, intimate, physical systems that made ordinary human life possible, each one building on the damage at last, each one targeting something so fundamental to Egyptian existence that its loss was not just practical but cosmological. The bread and the beer and the morning walk to the canal and the smell of the Nile at dawn and the sound of geese in the reeds and the flat roof where you slept in summer and the barley field that your father planted and his father before him, all of it, dismantled not by an army but by the world itself, by the systems of nature that had always been the foundation of safety, turning against the people who had built their entire civilization on trusting them. The next time you see images of ancient Egypt, the golden artifacts, the monumental temples, the hieroglyphs carved into stone walls meant to last forever, remember that the people who built all of that also woke up every morning and ground barley and carried water and slept on reed mats and worried about their children and believed that the universe was ordered and meaningful and that the gods were paying attention. They were not backdrop figures in a story about miracles. They were people living complete, difficult, specific human lives, and what happened to them was a catastrophe of a scale and precision that their world had no language for. We are still arguing about the mechanisms and the timeline and the historical record, which means we are still paying attention, still trying to understand, still refusing to let them be forgotten. That refusal, that insistence on looking directly at what ordinary people lived through rather than just at the monuments they left behind, is how history stays alive instead of turning into decoration. If this changed how you see the ancient world, subscribe so you never miss a story told this way, and send this to someone who thinks they already know everything about ancient Egypt, because they almost certainly do not know this.